Okay, well, welcome back to our sessions. I think it's very brave, everyone, to sacrifice their Sunday morning of laying in late, but actually coming to a teaching session. But we can regard this as a good gift to ourselves. Because indeed, this is where we can get a small break from otherwise a very hectic life. So, am I loud enough and clear enough for everyone before I begin? Yeah? Oh, good, wonderful. Okay, so as usual, let's begin with a few minutes of settling down our mind, stabilizing meditation, where we focus on our breath. So we begin by just bringing our awareness to, I think someone's got their mic on because I hear my own echo. I don't know if you could check if you have muted yourselves. Okay, that's better. Okay, so we take this few minutes just to really begin to. One of the main points of meditation is stabilizing meditation is to be aware of our present moment. So we first begin to be aware of our immediate surrounding. We are no doubt in a relatively more peaceful, calm surrounding. And wherever there's an intention to be virtuous, that can be considered to be also a sacred environment. So we're definitely in a sacred environment as well, wherever we may be, even in our homes. The moment we decide to have a positive state of mind, that becomes a sacred environment. So we really fully acknowledge this quiet, peaceful, sacred environment that we're in. And as we bring awareness now more intimately, more to ourselves, we begin to acknowledge our physical presence here, sitting on a chair or a cushion. And we just take a few minutes here to just really, as we acknowledge our physical presence, taking just some time to adjust our physical posture to be an appropriate one for meditation. If possible, one of the main instructions, main conducive instructions for meditation is to have one's back spine straight. And as we align our back spine and our neck to be straight, our head naturally just slightly bends forward in a natural way. We're not intentionally bending it forward, but in just a very natural way, the head just is aligned with our neck. And it is advised in our tradition generally not to have the eyes completely shut and not wide open either. So just our eyelids are brought down to where if we were to see anything, it'll just be the tip of our nose, but we're not focusing on anything specific. Just awareness of some visibility of light. And now we actually, as we go into our focused meditation, what we want to be focusing on is really just simply our breath. We don't see our breath, but we know that we're breathing in, breathing out every moment of our life. So here we're going to be fully aware of the breath coming in through our nostrils and leaving our nostrils. And actually, we can imagine, we have a mental image of the breath, meaning that we imagine seeing the breath coming in and going out. We follow the rhythm, the natural rhythm of the breath coming in and going out. And as we determine ourselves and dedicate ourselves to focus just on the breath, to the best of our ability, we actually notice our mind does settle down. That doesn't mean that thoughts and feelings may arise, emotions may arise, but particularly thoughts They just race through our mind, but this time the difference would be we would ourselves not to follow those thoughts, not to engage in them, so they will not distract us completely. So we'll just take now, beginning from now, this few moments to just focus on our breath. So in this relatively more settled and calm state of mind, which is most likely to be a neutral state of mind, we can now intentionally generate a positive state of mind, what is called a positive motivation for our session together today, so that our session and time and every minute and second that we spend together becomes most meaningful. So that is ensured by setting our motivation. And so we can generate this simple motivation that may my time and energy spent this morning here in listening to these words of wisdom from the ancient teachings of Buddhism, may become a cause, beginning with myself, to develop a true understanding of reality in relation to myself. By understanding my own mind better, may it actually help to then transform my mind from a confused, self-centered mind to a more expansive, more naturally giving, altruistic state of mind. And as we find more calm and peace within oneself and genuine happiness and contentment within oneself, may one then be able to really, truly share that with others. And while that is something that we will develop within our, as we progress in our practices now, ultimately, the most ultimate way to fulfill one's own ultimate potential, and thus be able to help others spontaneously and unceasingly with unconditional love and compassion, is to become enlightened. So thus, for the purpose of really truly benefiting others, may whatever activity, time and energy I spent here this morning become a cause for ultimate enlightenment. So with that positive motivation, we can now gradually come out of our focused meditation here with being aware of our physical presence again, and just gradually, as we begin to open our eyes, we become aware of the immediate external environment, the external reality again. And of course, please stretch out if you may wish to do so. So this morning being our last session, we have the last two verses to cover from our text. So yeah, if you recall from if you've been attending the sessions from the beginning, then you would recall from the very first session that we described that the ultimate goal that is presented in the Buddhist framework of practices and teachings, the ultimate goals is on a personal level to achieve what is called self-liberation. And then, however, that is, even in relation to oneself, is still a limited goal because if one has not fulfilled one's ultimate potential, one has not become what is called an enlightened being, a Buddha, although it is quite a significant stage to reach in terms of one's own happiness and a certain level of peace, definitely. Yet one has not fully developed oneself to the fullest possible potential one has, which is to become an enlightened Buddha. So therefore, on the next ultimate goal, which is presented in Buddhist teachings, is to actually become a fully enlightened being, a Buddha. So these practices are also, while one can take it on a practical level, on an everyday life level practices, ultimately it's a way to lead us to the ultimate goals. So the two main obstacles, if you would recall, to achieving these goals is in relation to one's own self-liberation. It is this false identity that we hold to ourselves called self-grasping. So for as long as we have this self-grasping attitude, or the faulty mind of holding on to a self, grasping onto a self, which I would explain a little bit further later, which is a false self, an inherently existent self, that becomes the main obstacle to achieving one main obstacle. That actually, for as long as one holds on to a truly existent self and grasps to that self, then all other afflictions are said to arise from that. So therefore, for as long as we have afflictions in our mind, we're going to experience the shortcomings, which are the shortcomings of anger, jealousy, pride, desires, and so forth. So in order to remove that, one has to cut root of the self-grasping mind. And that is, the self-grasping mind becomes the main obstacle to self-liberation. And it is also an obstacle to the ultimate state of enlightenment as well. But the primary obstacle to achieving the ultimate state of enlightenment is said to be self-centeredness. And so this word self-centeredness, or sometimes translated as self-cherishing, are various different degrees, different levels. So the teachings go into like leading from the more grosser levels to more and more subtler levels. So it is said that it is only when we overcome that self-centered mind that we can develop what is called an altruistic mind of generating genuine love and compassion, unconditional love and compassion, and based on that, developing a state of mind called bodhicitta, which is a mind aspiring in order to relieve the sufferings of all beings and lead them to ultimate happiness, aspiring to achieve enlightenment. That is bodhicitta. So self-centeredness becomes a main, obstacle to achieve that. Now, as a way to develop what is called bodhicitta, if you recall, there's two main techniques. The 7 cause and effect technique, which is presented in the teachings in a systematic way, and then another technique called this exchanging self with other technique. So we did cover briefly in the earlier sessions, the first session actually, about the 7 cause and effect sequence. And then actually, I just had to remind myself today that I was going to actually introduce a book to you based on that technique, but written by an old Western student, American, I think he's American, I'm not too sure, Rob Priest. And the book is called A Courage to Feel. I don't know if you can see it here. a courage to feel, Buddhist practices for opening to others. It's basically the technique of developing bodhicitta, and he goes through great detail of how the 7 cause and effect sequence is traditionally presented, but he also, for the benefit of us Westerners, he also goes into the difficulties we face, particularly in trying to recognize, trying to remember the kindness of one's mother or primary caregiver or mother, but why that is so. From the Jungian sort of psychology, he explains why we find that is a difficulty. But despite the difficulties of feeling a natural affection towards our mother, which not everyone has those difficulties, but some do have those difficulties. In spite of that, being able then to go a little bit further, and when you understand that, when you understand why you have those difficulties from a psychological point of view, it kind of like helps you understand better to unravel and go through those difficulties and hurdles, and then despite of those difficulties, perhaps be able to have a breakthrough and still appreciate our mother's kindness on another level, on a deeper level. So this book I really would recommend it to you. It's a very easy read, and it's a very good blend of the traditional Buddhist teachings, plus with a Jungian sort of psychological point of view, but also through his own practice and therapy practices, how he delivers this information in very comprehensive and easy way to understand. So now this last verse that we're going to be, this verse 7 is actually specifically related on this second technique, which is exchanging self with other technique of how to develop what is called bodhicitta. And the exchanging self and other technique is actually based on a very simple premises that one basically acknowledges the fact that just as one wishes to be happy and does not wish to experience any kind of misery at any level, so do others also naturally wish to experience happiness and do not wish to experience any misery and suffering. So on the basis of, and then of course it requires a little bit of a contemplating, and of like, why would I focus only on my own needs and my own happiness and wish to remove suffering for myself when all others have that same wish as well? Why? We did talk about the different degrees of self-centeredness, but on a very basic level, very coarse or basic level, we would all not wish to consider ourselves to be selfish, right? We would consider ourselves to be, wanting to be, consider ourselves to be kind and considering others' needs as well. And in fact, we all have that basis. It is a very basic human value of thinking about others' needs beyond just oneself. So it is based on really the basic human values we already have of wanting to consider other needs, but here it's taken on another level. It's taken up on a much more greater level where the needs even for oneself, it has to start with oneself. Of course, these teachings are based on the premises that one has already understood, that even happiness for oneself is not just temporary happiness that we're seeking. We're not seeking happiness in a transitory things, contaminated objects, which only give rise to only temporary happiness and satisfaction, but actually turn into misery later. So it is on the premises that we have understood that what we're seeking for, the happiness we're seeking for, is not in our contaminated external objects, but rather a deeper sense of happiness that can be found within, working on one's own mind, the happiness which comes from eliminating the afflictions in our own mind. Yeah. So we all know that for every moment we're not actively upset or angry are moments where we are feeling quite content and happy, isn't it? We can all relate to that. And so here we're talking about happiness for oneself, where we have developed ourselves where we can then actually be in a perpetual state of happiness, where we don't have to be upset and angry anymore. It sounds almost too good to be true, but apparently, according to Buddhist psychology, it is a state that it is possible. It is possible to reach that. So it is by seeing and acknowledging that is possible for oneself that one also wishes that for others as well. Wishes the real true happiness for not only just a few others, one's close and immediate close and dear ones, but actually extending that to all living forms, all living beings, even strangers, and actually even including people who really annoy us and disturb us. Because here again, the only reason someone is obnoxious and is hurting us in any way is because they're disturbed. Their mind is disturbed. If their mind was not disturbed and afflicted by the afflictions that causes them to do the things that hurt us or anyone else, if the minds were at actually peace and happy, there would be no reason for them to hurt anyone, right? So actually, it is in our own best interest, really, that we wish them to be happy, genuinely peaceful. We would not have any enemies if everyone was peaceful. So when we really think, I think it's very good for us to demystify these teachings and try to really see the practical approach to it, practical approach and how we can see it in a practical way that it is something that is reasonable, it makes sense. So here, the teaching here is where we are acknowledging that just as we want to be happy and do not wish to experience any misery and suffering, so do others as well. And in fact, when others are all, when others do reach a state of being perfectly happy and not suffering in any way, there will be no reasons, no conditions for others to also cause not only themselves any misery, but not to cause anyone else misery. Just like with ourselves, others will be in the same situation. So it is really, in a right state of mind, why wouldn't we want everyone to be happy and peaceful and become enlightened, right? So it is really on that very practical basis that, of course, when it comes to a practice, as an idea, it might be a really nice idea, and then it may sound to be idealistic and as a thought is a wonderful thought, but when it comes down to the practice, that's where we begin to struggle with, because in order to really wish others to be happy, we need to exhibit, we need to actually perfect our own mind, our own, not to react harshly to others and to avoid hurting others. And in order to really avoid hurting others, we need to work at overcoming what is hurting us. So it's really, as you're working for others, you're working on yourself. As you're working on yourself, you're working for the benefit of others. So when you come to that understanding, these practices, we can see it in a practical level. However, okay, so it is based on that premises that one wishes others to be. So here, if we have developed our minds to the point where we truly wish others to be free of misery and wish to be happy, in our practice, at least, your hand is raised. It says, is that me? Okay, I must have pressed something. So if we truly, when you reach a level of truly wishing others to be happy and being free of all miseries, when that attitude and that wish is developed and perfected to a certain level, one can reach a level where one is willing to forsake even one's own temporary happiness if it can make someone else happy. One will be willing to even take upon some miseries and difficulties if it can help others to be free of miseries. Now, in a systematic, what should we say? In the teachings, there's a specific practice called the practice of giving and taking. The Tibetan term is tong len. Tong means to actually give, and len means to take. So the practice of giving and taking, which is basically taking in the miseries of others and giving your own happiness to others in the practice of meditation. Now, when the practice is actually described in its full extent, it might seem really overwhelming. And in fact, for some, it is quite overwhelming and quite difficult to take upon right away, even to even imagine being able to do that. So that's why it is said that actually these teachings on this practice were actually passed down quite secretly initially. It was like more of a hidden practice because not everyone could possibly think of doing it to that extent. But then, as the real benefit and the great, great profundity and great powerful practice as it is, the earlier masters wanted this to become a little bit more accessible. So that's why then it started to becoming recorded in the teachings and actually then presented. And we still have to this day the lineage of these teachings. Now, this practice of giving and taking, as it is presented in the teachings, may seem quite far-fetched and overwhelming. However, let's take it down again to on a more practical level. On a basic level, we actually, whether you are aware, whether you are, now as I present these examples, you would all realize that you've all been practicing this teaching, this actual practice on some level at every time of your life. Now, how many of you may have, on occasions, been for example, maybe in a bus which is a little bit crowded or whatever, and then you saw someone else coming in who was more needy of a seat, and you are willing to sit up and give your seat to them, on a bus or a train, public transport, or you might be in a line of like at a cashier's at the supermarket, and you see someone who's a little bit distressed and like seem to be really in a big rush, and you might have noticed that they don't actually have as many things that you have, but nevertheless, even though you are in the queue before them, you offer them to go ahead, offering them to go in front of the queue. Or in many other situations, like when a child was demanding a need, you might have been in a rush, or you might have other things to do, but then suddenly you just give away your time, you take away your time, you just attend to this child and giving them your attention, or someone else who's in distress. So all of these are practical examples where we have willingly forsaken our own happiness, our own time, whatever we needed to do, and taken upon ourselves a little bit of a difficulty, temporary discomfort, because we knew it will make someone else happy. Now, the interesting thing is that when we were willing to give up our seat, and even to willing to give up our own pleasure of being able to sit down on this comfortable seat on a crowded bus. Well, I'm using examples of a crowded bus because being in India, this can happen very, very frequently. I don't know. In America, public transport is not that, depending where you are, it's not that of a big thing. But really, if any time, I'm using this example, but at any time when you were, like, let's say, I'm sure you would be related maybe more to letting someone else go in front of you in a queue. Although you may have forsaken your own temporary, gratification and happiness of being able to get there in front of the queue first and finish your whatever you need to do, even forsaking that, the magical thing here which occurs is that in actually giving up your seemingly temporary sort of happiness there and forsaking your happiness and taking upon a little bit of discomfort, in fact, whenever you recall that instance where you actually willingly gave other your time or gave your seat or whatever it may be, you actually start feeling very good from that memory. You feel very good. You actually feel like, I've done a good deed. It makes you feel good for the rest of the day sometimes. So really these practices, while seemingly is giving up one's own, happiness and pleasures, whatever it may be at that time, actually substitutes one for a better feeling, a more lasting, good, happy state of mind. Isn't that true? Wouldn't you find that to be true in your lives? So here, this is it is, I think, very good for us to use these practical examples from our life to then relate to these teachings, which seem to be otherwise seemingly quite far-fetched and quite beyond our capacity right now. We can see that, well, if we actually perfect our ways of helping others, even in small ways, and forsaking our own happiness in small ways, we could reach a state of being able to encompass greater practices in our meditation first, and then extending that in actual practical life. Now, one of the, I don't know, it might sound a little bit strange, but one of the things I find that, when I'm in a good mood, usually try to do something practical, is when you go in a public toilet. You might come in where it's quite messy and dirty. And then, of course, the first feeling for oneself is coming in and feeling a little bit nauseated with all the mess around. But then just take maybe 2 or 3 minutes extra and clean it up for the next person who comes in, who would feel it, who would not feel as such, or who would appreciate then the clean and quite nice space. And these are small deeds that we can easily do. And sometimes we forsake these small deeds thinking that we have to do something greater. We have to be a martyr or something. But I think, with all that wishful thinking of wanting to be a martyr and all of that is not something which is practical and possible right now, but small deeds like that. So here, what we're taking upon here now, an actual practice here then, as the verse here reads, maybe I can just read the verse for you rather than having to share the screen, because it's actually, I'm sure you have access to it anyway. So the verse 7 reads, "In short, may I directly and indirectly offer benefit and happiness to all my mothers, and may I secretly take upon myself all harm and suffering of my mothers." So here, verse 7 actually is integrating both of these techniques, that a 7 cause and effect technique of developing bodhicitta, which is recognizing all one's beings as being one's mother. So it is on basis on that, but also recognizing that others, regardless of they've been kind to you or not, even everyday life, even if they may be strangers, knowing that they would appreciate to be happy and less misery, then willingly to offer that. So here it says, may I directly and indirectly. Directly is where we gave some examples now, some very practical small examples of actually, spending the extra few minutes here to maybe clean up a public toilet, or willingly giving up your seat in the bus, or willingly allowing someone else to go in front of the queue. These are just some examples. There's so many other examples in life where we can do smart, practical things, and that would be the direct way. Indirectly here would be, in fact, in meditation. And there's an actual meditation that comes with this practice, where one actually imagines taking in the sufferings of others. And it actually starts in the meditation form. It starts with taking in. That is how usually the meditation. So it is actually conjoined with the breath. Imagine that as you breathe in, you're taking in the sufferings of all beings. And then as you breathe out, you imagine you're giving your happiness to other beings. There's actual practice that is, we don't have time here to refer to a particular practice, but it's simply in simple ways, that is how it's done. Now, however, as you may come across this practice, when you would initially here in an actual meditation form, you're imagining to take in all types of sufferings and miseries in the world that people are experiencing. Of course, it becomes a little bit challenging here, when you have to take in some sort of like miseries and uncomfortableness, such as diseases and so forth of others. But a very crucial point of this practice of giving and taking, which if it is not understood properly, then one would feel like this is really impossible to meditate on, is where when you take in the sufferings of others, you actually imagine it, the sufferings of others coming in the form of like a black light. And here in the center of your chest, you imagine a black lump, which represents one's own self-centered mind. At the very core of our existence, of our identity, we have this sense of like a very strong sense of me, right? So that it is said that it is holding on to that very strong sense of me and putting all one's importance on that me, which on the very coarsest level is what is called selfishness, or where selfishness arises, or narcissism arises. But on a more deeper level, feeling that sense of like being the center of the universe is all because of that self-centered mind. And then, although we don't have time to go in detail here, the teachings describe in very great detail of how all our own miseries, all our own problems arise because of this self-centeredness. So it is not only it is not only for the interest of others, to being kind to others, that we need to get rid of the self-centeredness, but for our own sake. Actually, when we are really identify and really be able to recognize the self-centeredness for what it is, as the teachings call it, it's like a chronic disease. It's like a chronic disease which has caused us so much misery in the past. And for as long as we have this chronic disease, it will continue to cause us so much misery in the future. So we can identify, and as I mentioned in our previous session, the reason why we find it so difficult to separate ourselves from the self-centered sort of attitude we have is because we believe that is part of our identity. We take this self-centered attitude as being part of our identity. So whenever there's a suggestion that we need to get rid of that, we think, oh, no, but we feel like we're getting a part of ourselves, of who we are. But in the next verse, it'll go into more detail of explaining that this is actually based on a completely false perception. It's a completely wrong, as the verse 8 reads here, it would take more explanation here, but in this line where it says, the practice here, it says, may all this remains undefiled by the stains of eight-worded concepts, may I, perceiving all phenomena as illusory, be released from the boundaries of attachment. So perceiving all phenomena as illusory is the point in one line here, and saying that this sense of self that we have, that we hold on to, the identity we have of the self, that wrong identity we have of the self, and the self-centered attitude that it causes is actually all an illusion. It's not who we really are. And of course, it will require much more further analysis from our side and to really understand it on a more deeper level. But in very simple terms, that's what it is, as the teachings explain, that attitude of self-centeredness is actually like a chronic disease. It causing us all the harm and all the misery that we have experienced in the past and present, and will cause us in the future. So when we really recognize that attitude of a self-centered mind as being like a disease, then who wouldn't in their right mind want to get rid of a chronic disease? Yeah, I mean, it seems completely absurd that we want to hold on to a chronic disease that is causing us misery. The very reason we go to a doctor and want to be diagnosed whatever elements we might be having is because we want to get rid of the disease, right? So here we can add on that it is a psychological disease. The self-centered mind is a deep psychological disease that we have been holding on to for time immemorial. And for as long, and we are still holding on to it very greatly now. And until and unless we have been introduced to it as being something unhealthy, we will continuously be holding on to it. So now, of course, here we're coming to the last stages of the practice where we have assumed that we have really recognized this and really taken be seen that this self-centered mind is actually a chronic disease, a psychological chronic disease that is causing us misery. So when we really recognize that, we want to get rid of that. So here, the suffering of others that we're bringing in becomes the remedy. We imagine in our meditation, in our visualization, we imagine the suffering of all beings. We can start, the teaching said that we practically can start with one or two beings that we are close to, and then start to extend it to strangers. And then when our mind is trained, we can even extend it to enemies, taking in the miseries and sufferings of all beings, friends, strangers, and enemies. And that then, coming in as in the form of a black light, comes down to the center of our chest where there's this lump, a black lump, which represents our own self-centered attitude. And as soon as that, how should we say, light, black light of all beings that represents suffering comes in, it actually destroys that lump in our chest, which is the self-centered attitude. Now, when our own self-centered mind is completely destroyed, then there will be no hesitation in giving our happiness to others. Because what prevents us from giving whatever it may be to others is because if I give this away, what will be left from me? How can I give this away? It'll impoverish me. So it's that mind that I'll be deprived of something which is preventing us from giving at whatever level, whether it's material objects, whether it's time. And so the teaching here is very specific in taking in first the sufferings of other beings, then the very causes of those sufferings, which are the delusions and karma, and then the very imprints of the other sufferings of other beings. Very detailed, very subtle levels. And what one is giving is the things which is most dear to us. First, we give away our body, which is really dear and precious to us, one of the most precious things. And then we give away our possessions, wealth. And then we give away what is most dear to us, although we may not really understand it on a subtle level, is what is called merits, which are all our virtues. Now, at the time of death, we have to leave behind our body. No matter how precious it is, the very term death means separating from our body. So we have to leave back our body anyway. And even our possessions, our prized possessions have to be left behind. Our material objects, at the time of death, we cannot take that with us. So in terms of the value, even for oneself, really, when we have to discard it anyway, it is not that much of a value. It's not something we can take with us in our next lives. Now, the only thing it is said that we can take with us, with ourselves in the next life, is our virtues, our merits. And that is something really intimate. It is our merits that will secure a good rebirth for the next life and continuous good existence in the future. So we are here at the level, or deepest level of a practice, we're willing to give away even our happiness, our merits. But again, just in case we think that we're completely missing out here, we've taken everyone's sufferings and miseries and giving away all our happiness and even the very causes of our happiness, our merits away. Again, this is really for training our mind. And they say that initially, if you feel a little bit discomfort, it's a good sign. It means you're taking this practice seriously. But in fact, when we really understand the significance of practice, taking in the other's suffering is not taking upon more suffering for oneself. In fact, it is destroying the very cause of our own sufferings, of our own miseries, which is the self-centered mind. So it's destroying the self-centered mind, which is in the form of a lump in our chest that has been completely destroyed. And then when that is destroyed, the self-centeredness, we are then more capable, or actually naturally willing and spontaneously willing to give to others. But it's just in case there's a tinge of like, oh, but I'm giving away too much perhaps. Actually, the more you give, according to the teachings, the more you will receive. The more you'll receive. So these practices, we have taken it now to the full-scale, biggest level. But on our everyday lives, if we see the value of giving away, and then what is preventing us to give is the self-centered mind, and we can try to work at overcoming the self-centered mind, on whatever level we can, then we can begin with our engaging more in the practical levels of these practices to the best of our ability. Now, again, here, it is not suggesting that we go out and be a martyr and, willingly go to war zones where we're not, ready yet to do that and try to help others. There are those who are able to do that. They're amazing. We may not be ready yet, but what we can do, what we can begin on a practical level directly in small levels, giving up one's seat in buses or allow others to go in front of you in the queue and so forth. But in one's meditation, one can start to perhaps try to implement this in one's meditation. It's a visualization. It's a practice to train our mind. Now, although I speak very enthusiastically about these practices, do I do them regularly myself? No, it's very difficult. To do it in a formal way, I find it very difficult, but I can just share with you a very small, maybe experience I've had, just slight experience and trying to even imagine doing these practices. And when it works, even when you try to imagine doing these practices, even imagining this is, that I'm doing this, I found that it has an incredible impact on the mind. So I would have shared previously that a couple of years ago, I started to recognize some symptoms of depression. And so when the depression is one of the symptoms is that waking up in the morning is like extreme. After you wake up, I just get this feeling of a pang in my chest. And then that feeling of a grip on my chest. And it's almost like it's like an almost, I don't know what you call it specifically. Is it an anxiety attack or just feeling that sense of completely closed up, and it's hard to get out of bed then. So there I'm waking up sometimes very early in the morning. It's not time to get out of bed anyway. And I'm just there, just kind of almost paralyzed with this feeling. Now, when there's no way to go back to sleep again and in fact, when it is time to wake up and still I'm feeling that way, there's, I need to get on with the day. So I feel stuck though. So what happens, just, the more I dwell on this uncomfortable feeling, the worse it seems to get. And so having heard these teachings and having recited these verses for so long, I just now start to, lying in bed, just even imagine, okay, well, since I'm suffering now anyway, and there's so many others who are suffering much greater than me right now. This is not my imagination. It's true that there's so many people out in the world who don't have any access to any help and suffering in much greater ways. So physically and psychologically. So here, and then I just start imagining taking in the sufferings of others, just thinking about the others who are suffering and just imagining they're coming in. And just even imagining that, although the mind is not very clear and it's all murky, just in the back of my mind, I'm just imagining that. And it's, I don't know, it's the only description I can give. It's almost like clearing away the clouds. Just suddenly this feeling of just strong sense of tightness in my chest begins to relax a bit. I just feel just at more ease. Suddenly now I can have a breather and then I can get out of bed, start my day. So it's really amazing. Never fails not to work. That is my saving grace every morning. Of course, as soon as I get out of bed and I get to again, forget about all sense being suddenly, right? But in that moment, what helps me to get a sort of a break and be able to get out of bed and start the day is when I've just imagined to do this practice. Now, one thing I feel that I've learned from this, or that I started to get a glimpse into it, is that the teachings say that the cause of all one's problems, physical as well as psychological, all one's problems, the root is holding on to this false self. And then from that the false notion of the self and grasping to a false self then produces this self-centered mind, which then becomes actively how it becomes this focus on the self, and how that is the root of all problems. Now, I got a glimpse into thinking that this must be true. Because the moment I shift my focus, the moment I think about others, even that sense of being unable to move, unable to do anything, that sense of like chest, and the pang in my chest, suddenly released. It's all psychological. There's no actual physical thing which is happening in my chest, but psychologically, because it's such a strong feeling, and it actually feels that there's a lump in my chest. But just even doing this practice, imagining to do it, begins to release that sense of the tightness in the chest. So I got a sense that, well, it must be true that the moment I shift my focus on others and shifting the focus away from myself, I get a release. So that in turn must mean that all my problems, although this is a more like immediate situation that I can notice it on a more subtle level, on a very, very fundamental subtle level, as the teachings describe, perhaps what the teachings say as being this self-centered mind and this self-grasping mind, specifically grasping to itself, is really the cause of all other problems. It might be true. There must be some truth in it. That's the sense I got out of it. So the word here that I may secretly take upon myself, all harm and suffering of my mothers, the word secretly here suggests that we are not announcing to others, we're doing it in a very modest way. So here, if we have someone who we have a disagreement with, we don't have to go around announcing to them that, oh, I'm going to take on all your miseries and sufferings for you. Here we're doing this practice on a personal level, so doing it just on oneself. And so here, and then actually the next verse here will really clarify why the reason we need to do it secretly is because, as the verse 8 says, may all this remains undefiled by the stains of the 8 worldly concepts or 8 worldly concerns. So according to the Buddhist teachings and psychology, when our practices, whatever we do, when it is stained, it's called stained, meaning that it will stain it will not make it pure. When our practices are diluted with the worldly concerns, then it doesn't become a pure practice. What are the 8 worldly concerns? They're actually pairs of 4. So there's 4 pairs. And that's the easiest way to remember it. So there are 8 worldly concerns, but they actually can be condensed into 4 pairs. And so the first 2 are being extremely pleased and excited when one receives gifts and there's some gains for oneself. Personal temporary gains, being extremely pleased about that. And the opposite of that is being displeased, unhappy when one does not receive material gains. And so we can all relate to that in our everyday life, where around Christmas time or our birthday, we get so pleased, sometimes overly excited when there's a nice gift. But if we don't receive a gift from we think that who we deserve the gift from, if someone has forgotten our birthday or give us a gift, or even forgotten to wish us a happy birthday, we might get really upset. So these are worldly concerns, the attachment to wanting something and the complete distraught mind of not getting it. That's the first pair. The second pair is being extremely happy and joyous when we experience good feelings, good sensual feelings, when we're having nice food, nice music, seeing nice, having a nice music to our ears and seeing pleasant things, being extremely pleased when we're having good sensual pleasures. But as soon as we have a little bit of discomfort, being completely distraught. So therefore, if we find that if we're overly attached to sensual pleasures, then the opposite will come about naturally, which is we'll become immediately displeased and unhappy as soon as we're deprived of it. So those are the two second pairs: being attached to pleasures, being extremely happy when we experience sensual pleasures because of being attached to them, and being completely distraught and unhappy when we're deprived of those sensual pleasures, when we don't receive that. Then this third pair would be being extremely pleased when we hear nice, pleasing sounds from others, nice remarks from others, pleasing sound, pleasing speech from others. And the moment we hear something critical, in our mind, we're completely unhappy and distraught. Yeah. So pleasing sounds and being attached to praise and so forth, being extremely pleased and happy, exuberant, excited when we hear some form of praise, but I'm incredibly unhappy when there's the slightest criticism. And then the last pair is, the fourth pair is being extremely happy when there's fame, when one is known to be famous in whatever circle. It could be in a grand way, or even amongst one's family, knowing to be like the nice guy, the good person. We're extremely attached to being well known in whatever circle it may be, within our immediate circle of our family, but beyond that, of course, within our work colleagues, our friends. And then, of course, the wider we're famous, the more we are known, the more we seem to make us happy. Yeah. So if our happiness is dependent on our fame, then the opposite will be true. As soon as there's some denigration, some words of that make you to become like unwell, unpopular, then become completely distraught. So these are the 8 worldly concerns, which actually we can see that is really a driving force for most of the things we do in our life. And to the extent a stronger sense of self-centeredness there is, the greater these worldly concerns will be in our life. And so therefore, so here it is suggesting that may all of these remain undefiled by the stains of 8 worldly concerns, meaning that I'm not doing these practices just to be famous, so that I'll be well known, that others will say nice things about me, but we're doing this practice because we really know that is the best thing. That is the best thing for ourselves and for others. So when we really see the value of the practices, then we do it as a way to develop ourselves, not for the sake of being famous or being wanting to look cool, wanting to impress others. Those would be unfounded reasons. That would be like not a true altruistic reasons for doing these practices. So therefore the teachings are suggesting that we do these practices without being stained by the 8 worldly concerns. So when we do this practice of giving and taking on a daily basis, here also secretly, as I found another description actually from one of the Dalai Lama's teachings on 8 verses, he says also the secretly here has also this connotation of doing it with the breath, taking in the breath, like doing it like, it is not as if you're announcing outside, but just doing it in the meditation. When you're doing taking in, you're breathing in, taking in the suffering of others. When you breathe out, giving the happiness to others. So when it's conjoined with the breath, that is also one connotation of doing it like quietly, secretly or quietly. So the last, the 2 last lines here from verse 8 is, by perceiving all phenomena as illusory. So this is the point where, of course, if would require maybe a whole nother course on the teachings of what is called selflessness or emptiness. So this is the teachings that in one word here, perceiving all phenomena as illusory encompasses the whole concept of how things are lacking, that all things, all phenomena, including oneself and all other phenomena, lack inherent existence, lack true existence, what we call independent existence, or what can be also known as intrinsic existence. So that is to say that how things actually do exist is dependent on many causes and conditions. Things exist interdependently, not independently. Yeah. While that is the reality, and of course this would require much more thought and much more explanation, and we fail to have time now here. But just on a very basic level, it is said that let us begin just with ourselves here as an individual being. According to the Buddhist description of what a self is, what we consider a self is basically there's different levels of understanding the self, but on all Buddhist schools, it is unanimously agreed that a self is not an independently existent entity. Well, although we perceive it that way, we perceive the self as being a really solid, independent sort of entity within ourselves. But what the self really is, according to the Buddhist teachings, is none other than actually a label given upon our body and mind. It is dependent on our body and mind. There could be no self without the body and mind. And I'm sure you would all have already received teachings on what the mind is from the Buddhist perspective. It's not the physical matter, it's not the brain, it's something more subtle, which is part of ourselves. But that two main parts, what is called the five aggregates, includes the body and mind. So in very simple terms, what the self is an entity which is labeled, which is based upon or labeled upon the combination of the body and mind. So we could not possibly exist without a body and mind. But we have this notion yet that we are a separate entity. There's a separate entity, separate from my body and mind. And the Dalai Lama gives a good example here of how we do have that instinctive sort of notion that we're a separate entity. Now, if someone were to come along and say to you, give you this, like present this option to you, would you like to exchange your body, your present body now, which is, I mean, as attached as we are to our body, we do know that our body is the basis for all our physical illnesses, right? Our body is slowly decaying away and it is subject to pain and misery. So if someone were to come along and say, hey, there's this body called an enlightened body, body of the Buddha, or body of an angel or God, or, whatever tradition we belong to, if there's this perfect body which is not subject to pain and decay, and internal youth, internal beauty, enlightened being's body. If someone comes along and says, would you like to exchange your body and your mind for an enlightened body and mind? We would have no hesitation. Oh, definitely, I would like to exchange my body and mind for enlightened beings and body. That plus in the very language, when we talk about the body and mind as being possessions. So when we say my body, there's already an indication that I am something separate. I'm here somewhere, I'm something separate here, which owns my body. My body belongs to me, and my mind belongs to me, as if there's a separate me somewhere. Yeah? So no wonder when someone says, would you like to exchange your body and mind for enlightened body and mind? We would have no hesitation saying, yes, definitely. Because we think there's this sort of like very innate, it's called innate notion, innate sort of instinctive notion within ourselves, deep within ourselves, thinking that there's something separate, there's a separate identity of me, which owns the body and mind. According to the Buddhist teachings, that's a complete illusion. There is no separate I, there's no separate me. Obviously, the body is not me. And the mind, although it's more obscure to us, the Buddhist teaching said the mind is not me too, because there's many parts to the mind. Mind is a constantly changing phenomenon. It's constantly changing. As we speak, our mind is going through changes. It's constantly, as the clock ticks, our mind is also going through this momentum of changing from moment to moment. So the mind, and there's many facets to our mind. There's our feelings are part of the mind, our emotions are part of the mind. So which part would be the I or the me, if the mind was me? The body is obviously not me. We have to discard the body. We're not losing ourselves when we lose our body. So it will require much more investigation and discussion, but really it is said that, to assume that we are our body or mind is one extreme, that is an extreme eternalism. And then to think that, oh, well, if I'm not the body and mind, maybe perhaps I don't exist at all. That is an extreme of nihilism, because we do exist. So according to the Buddhist description of who we are is a very subtle notion. It's actually, there's a conventional level of who we are, which is the I, the person who is dependent on the body and mind, the combination of body and mind, which we call, we all relate to as being me, and I go, I walk. So that who's doing the action, that combination of what we said, body and mind, is the conventional level of me. But the very subtle level of me is something which is obscure to us, which is basically a mere label given upon the body and mind. There's no concrete, findable, concrete, separate me, which we can say, this is me. And this is true for the identity of all other existences. So when we talk about, for example, a book, such as this book that I'm holding up, if we were not to do this analysis, we would say, if someone would say, please find me the book, this book, The Courage to Feel, please fetch it for me. You'll go around, and when you see it lying on the table, you'll pick up this book and say, here's the book. And conventionally, this would be true. We have found the book. But here we're talking about really finding for the book. Where is really the book? Is the first, is this the first cover page here? Is this the book? No, this is just a cover. What is the second page, the book? No, well, that's just actually it's a page which has only the title on it. It's still not the actual book yet. So perhaps the second page is, no, that's just the title, the content, table of contents. So that's not the book. Then as we go through the book, in every part of the book, we will come to a point where we can find something saying, well, this is the book. And then normally on a conventional level, we'll say, oh, well, the combination of all of this together is the book. Conventionally, that's true, yes. It's a book which is dependent on all of these parts, but that is really not the book. Yet in our mind, we still hold on to a book. When you go around looking for the book, in our mind, we think there's a book which is really existing out there from its own side, independently. And because that is said to be a completely wrong conception, that there is an actually inherently existing book, a book which exists out there by its own right. And we relate to not only to the book, but everything in our life. As an ordinary person with this misconception, we see everything as having its own inherent independent existence. That's how things appear to us. Things appear to us as being independently existent, inherently existent. But that appearance is just an illusion. It's not a real reality. It's not how actually things actually exist. So based on the illusion that things have its own independent inherent existence, then based on that first initial illusion that there's something which exists out there inherently, then we place on more exaggerations on that illusion. Things are either very beautiful, and then when we see something as being attractive, we add on many more attributes. Our conceptual mind, the misconceptions add on many extra attributes of beauty onto it to make that thing looking not only beautiful from its own side, but very beautiful, very attractive. And then thus we develop attachment towards it. And that's how attachment arises, based on the illusion that there is something which exists truly, inherently, from its own side. We develop attachment to those things which, there are things, conventionally, there are things which are more beautiful than others. But that is dependent on many causes and conditions to make it beautiful. It's not something which the beauty exists from its own side. It was dependent on many, many causes and conditions, right? Would you agree with that? So many causes and conditions make, but yet our mind, our faulty mind, our faulty perception perceives a beautiful object right out there existing from its own side. And then because of further misconceptions we have, we add on attributes. We think that's really beautiful, beyond even the natural reality. When a mind of attachment does not want to see rather any fault in the object. And no wonder, there's this expression in English, love at first sight. When you see a very beautiful object, usually this phrase is used with terms. This term or phrase is used with individuals, peoples. When you're attracted to an opposite, to someone that is beautiful, it's called love at first sight. And so indeed, they appear to be completely perfect. Yeah, and it's only when we get to know them, get to see them, get to spend some time, that we begin to see some of the unnatural, unattractive attributes. They were there right from the beginning, but we didn't see it. It was not because we were seeing an inherently beautiful person. So when we really go through this and really look at it, how it actually premates, how all our perceptions are influenced by that faulty state of mind. So basically what we're seeing is said to be like an illusion. We're perceiving things which actually are not in reality, really truly there. So that is the phrase here of how everything, all phenomena are actually like illusory. We are perceiving all phenomena as illusory, meaning that as illusory, it's not, of course, there's a difference between a book was completely conjured up, which is by, like if you're hallucinating and see a book, that's not a true book. Yeah, that's not a book in the actual, it's a double illusion, so to speak. And here, when we see a book that I'm holding, and you can hold it and feel it if you were to be here, then of course this is not illusion. Generally speaking, from a relative point of view, we would say, oh, it's not illusion. There's actually a book here. On a conventional level, that's true. So we wouldn't say this book, seeing this book is an illusory book, but it is like an illusion from the deeper level of reality, because what we're perceiving here is an inherently existing book, a book which exists from its own side, and that is an illusion. So of course, it is hard to try to further elaborate on this when we don't have much time, but I hope you've got actually a sense here. And one thing that I think, sometimes people say, oh, can you explain emptiness like in 2 words? Emptiness for dummies. So I'll say this, although there's no such thing, there's no such way as trying to understand emptiness or selflessness in just a few simple words. At least if we start with a good understanding and not an incorrect understanding, then that would be helpful. So I would say this, the concept of emptiness in Buddhism is not that things are empty of existence. If things were empty of existence, then there would be nothing. If this book was empty of existence, then there would be no book, right? So when Buddhism says this book is in the nature of being empty, it is not suggesting that it's empty of existence. So if the book was empty of existence, it wouldn't exist, and we couldn't even talk about it. So what is the ultimate nature of the book? It is empty of inherent existence. So we have to add in that word, inherent or independent. Yeah, the book is not empty of existence, it is empty of inherent existence or independent existence. And that is true for ourselves. We do exist, but we don't exist inherently or independently. We're empty of inherent existence, independent existence. And so that is, I think, we start from that basis, from the basis that, this notion of what to call selflessness or emptiness in Buddhism is not talking about there's no self, but is rather saying that there's no inherently existent self, no independent existent self. Things are not empty of existence, but are empty of inherent existence, independent existence. So I know, it may sound like it might sound like concepts here, whatever, but actually intellectual how should we say, concepts here, but actually the teachings say that when one gets an experience of all of this, then when one gets an actual experience of there being no truly existent self, independent existent self, then all of the rest of the misconception in relation to that root misconception we have, the very fundamental misconception we have, which is that there's a truly existent self, when that fades away, slowly begins to fall away, all of the rest of the misconceptions that lead us to making all the mistakes in our life will also, and the exaggerated views of attachment and anger and jealousy and pride, in all of those, there's many, we can talk about this 6 root afflictions and the 20 10 root afflictions and or 10 primary afflictions and then 20 secondaries. All of those are naturally will fade away or start to fade away. That's how it's explained in the teachings. So that's why the teachings really emphasize, come down to the point of like where we need to really begin to get this understanding to unravel this misconceptions we have. And so, which then will begin to open the doors to our true sense of being and happiness and peace that comes along with that. So, not wishing to take too much more time, to allow you to give you some time to maybe ask questions, if possible, to clarify anything. So please raise your hand or unmute yourself. It might have been all just too overwhelming to even be able to form a question. I don't know.
I have a comment, Venerable
Sure.
Michael.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Did someone else have a question? No, I can just hear my echo, I think. I've been working from another translation of the first verse, and it says, determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit from all sentient beings. And I just thought that was interesting, that like I used to read that word from, and I used to think, I thought I was trying to get the benefit for all sentient beings, and then I realized the benefit I'm getting from them is what you've been talking about today, which is to work on that illusory sense of self. And the whole thing you've been saying this lesson with is the more you do this, the more you get back. And I guess that verse, when I thought about it, I could see how that balanced there. So thank you.
Yes. No, that thanks for sharing that. Yes, because sometimes we need to understand things in its contextual level basis. So, well, actually, you've reminded me that one of the famous phrases that Dalai Lama likes to use is, he says that, we all, of course, would like to get some benefit for ourselves. We can't deny that fact that we want to be happy too, and we want to be rid of suffering. So if that is called selfishness, then, well, might as well be wisely selfish, he says. If you truly help others and truly think about others, the real benefits will come for oneself. So he says, we need to be wisely selfish, not foolishly, or the foolish selflessness will be just being self-centered, just focusing on one's own personal needs, even at the expense of others, causing others distress. So the main emphasis here is it's okay to be happy yourself if it's not going to cause anyone harm. But usually, in our worldly sense, we try to gain things and gain benefit for ourselves at the expense of others. And that's the main thing, of the fault of self-centeredness. We create negative karma whenever we hurt others. So actually, in trying to acquire things for ourselves by hurting others is not going to be useful for us, because we're creating just more negative karma. So, but instead, when we actually learn to really, truly help others and benefit others, although it may cause initial discomfort, as the teaching suggests here, we willingly forsake those discomforts in the interest of others, really, when it really is based on the interest of others. In fact, it is amazing how we can do much more for others when it is based on the interest of others. If it's just for oneself, one can easily give up. So when we truly help others, the real beneficiary is oneself. So that's why the Dalai Lama likes to say, if we want to be selfish, then be wisely selfish. Just using these simple terms. So, well, thanks for sharing that. Thank you, Amanda. Anyone else would like to ask a question or share a comment? Please do so. Yes.
Venerable, thank you for your teachings. I have a question.
Sure.
Does anything exist inherently?
Does anything?
Yes.
According to the teachings, no, nothing. Nothing.
So,
even emptiness itself doesn't exist inherently.
okay, so then where do you go from there? Where does your mind go from there?
Well, well, do you mean like when you realize that, when you understand that, where do you go from that?
Like nothing exists inherently. So
right.
Nothing is kind of like a object. It's a concept. It's a something. Nothing is something.
Well, I know words can be misleading here, and so that's why actually this, to get a real profound understanding of what is being explained here, it will require a little bit more dissecting of the words itself and coming down to the actual real concept, what it is. Basically, in very simple terms, nothing exists inherently is basically saying, on the other way around, to say, to present that from another point of view, it is saying that nothing, in saying that nothing exists inherently, it is not suggesting that things are void of concreteness, things are void of actual existence again, but rather it is saying that things do exist, and because it doesn't exist inherently, it suggests that it does exist dependently. It exists dependently. Everything exists in relation to something else. If it were to exist inherently, it would have to be a solid entity which does not depend on anything else, just like hanging out there in space just by itself, not depending on anything else. But that's not how things exist. Our mind does exist, but dependent on many other factors. It exists dependently. Does that help to? Yeah?
Very much helpful.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. So indeed, the teachings say that initially there's this. As ordinary people, we are mostly into the extreme of eternalism. We see things exist, and they exist really inherently or dependently or permanently. They really are concrete. That is the extreme that we are mostly fallen into. Now, as we begin this investigation, they say that then there's danger, the next danger is falling into the other extreme of nihilism. Oh, and they say that actually many meditators, when they go into the meditation of emptiness, they tend to then first fall into a little bit of the extreme of nihilism, where, oh, nothing exists. And then when that initial sense of nothing exists arises, they say that actually even a strong fear might arise, like, oh, I don't exist. And then the fear, the sense of losing oneself, the sense of losing one's identity may arise, and a great fear can occur there. But then when one further investigates and analyzes and realizes that although things don't exist inherently, that does not suggest that it does not exist completely at all, but rather it does exist, but dependently. It is dependent on other things. And it expands our view much a greater level. That sense of me being the universe, center of the universe, comes from that misconception that this me that I consider to be the center of the universe is an independent and existent self, not depending on anything else. Yeah, that's why we have this sense of annihilation from others. That we're very self-absorbed, and the more self-absorbed we are, the more neurotic we become. And then, according to the teachings, according to Buddhist psychology, even depression, all of that comes from that sense of just me, self-centeredness, self-focusedness. As we expand our mind, we expand it, we see that we're not alone here. We're not, I'm not, I'm so concerned about me, my suffering. I just realized, hang on, I haven't plugged something in. Is everyone there? I forgot to plug mine into a small external power battery. So that was, I'm glad it lasted as long as it did, actually. I'd forgotten to plug it in. So anyway, yeah. So do you get the sense here of how when this idea of that we are dependent on many factors already, even as a concept, helps us to expand our way of view, like, oh, so that's in fact, we are connected to actually, on a subtle level, we're connected to so many things, even other beings. So we're not this soul identity, this soul person, me, that we tend to really feel that the more sense we have of this me, focus on the me, the more actually produces a sense of loneliness, that I'm completely cut off from the whole world. And that's when I'm suffering. I'm here suffering just by myself. My suffering is more important than everyone else's suffering. The more we believe in that, even not consciously, but the more we believe in it intuitively, the more we get hung up and tied up inside. Yeah, the more we let go, the more we have this expansive view, the more at ease we are. And the reality is that we are connected to the rest of the world and everyone else. Yeah, the more we are open to that, the more we see that whatever suffering it may be, the more we are open to others' help, the more we actually reach out to others, the more likely we will be helped, will be actually helped, isn't it? So on a practical level, I think we can also relate in that way. So I know we don't have too much time left, but we can, I'm very happy to address any question. One more, yeah. Did you have a?
We have,
Anna?
yes, we have, thank you, Venerable. We have a question in the chat box from Anne.
Sure.
And she's saying, explains, in Tonglen, we breathe in dark smoke and out our blessings and goodness. In other Buddhist meditations, we breathe in pure light and our sludge, in inverted commas, out. I find it hard to make this switch. Any advice?
Yes, definitely. It is. It's hard. I mean, so that's why this teaching of Tonglen is not suggested as one of your first practices to do in Buddhism. That's why usually the first practices that are suggested in Buddhism is to take in the positiveness of the enlightened beings, positive white light, so to remove our own darkness. Yeah. And so initially that is more comfortable. We want to get rid of our negativity, and so in order to get rid of our negativity, to bring in positiveness and breathing out our negativity is a more suitable, more comfortable practice at a beginner's level, and that is what would be suggested at beginner's level. But since we are covering this text and we're covering these verses, I think it is important for us to realize that, okay, I'll give this example now before I forget. Let's imagine that we've all signed up to climb Mount Everest. We're all eager, yes, I want to climb to the top of Mount Everest. And we're all enthusiastic. We'll just imagine this for the sake of our, for our example here, illustration here. So we're all signed up to climb Mount Everest. Now, you're all geared up and wanting to very enthusiastic. Yes, I want to climb the top of Mount Everest. Now imagine if the guide comes along and says, oh, well, here, and it gives you a brief and gives you a map which will just show you only reach the base of Mount Everest, maybe perhaps, or only the halfway up to Mount Everest. We would say, but how do we get to the next stages? Although we have not even maybe started that journey yet, we would like to have the full scale of the map of how to actually reach step by step, taking us to top of Mount Everest, wouldn't we? It'll make sense. It's a common sense to having the whole overview of knowing that what we are going through. So this is how the Buddhism is really. It's giving us like this big map of practices. And from that, we take as much as we can manage. Now, even if we are so enthusiastic to climb Mount Everest, perhaps we can maybe make it to the base camp if we're lucky, and then maybe perhaps we might make it to the first camp or whatever. But making that attempt and getting as far as that is already quite something. We have reached, it's reached some sort of goal, and that's where we start. And then the rest of this journey, if it's possible in this time, we will get there. So the whole point really is that these practices of taking in the suffering of others in the form of black light and giving out your own happiness in the form of white light is, as mentioned earlier in the question, is a reverse of what we're comfortable with. So now, and we don't need to do this practice right away. Let us first focus on the practices that which are comfortable for us. And as we see the significance of the teaching and practice, and we feel that, okay, let me maybe take this a step further. When one feels ready, then try to implement it. And then it might start to feel a little bit comfortable. But again, I want to emphasize the main point that I mentioned earlier of the Tonglen practice. For those of you who've heard of it, sometimes this point is not really emphasized. And I think that's where we miss out in seeing the significance. The main point, the essential point, is when we take in this black light, as uncomfortable as it may be, it is actually serving as a means to get rid of our own very subtlest form of our darkness, the subtlest form of our negativities, which is the self-centeredness within ourselves, and it's destroying that. So the black light, it's like, sometimes I use the example of using like a hand grenade to destroy a nuclear bomb. Taking in the black light is going to be a little bit uncomfortable, but when we know that it's going to remove a much bigger problem. When we go see a doctor, in order to get cured of a disease, we might have to receive an injection. That's a milder form, but we're willing to receive the injection, even though it's painful, if it's going to remove a greater disease within us, right? We're willing even to have a surgery if necessary, if it's going to remove something malignant or something tumorous in our body. If it requires a surgery, it's very uncomfortable. We would rather not opt for a surgery, but if that is the only way, we would have to accept it, knowing that that will remove a greater cause of disease. So although a little bit uncomfortable taking in the black light, if we really know the significance that is destroying the very source, the very root of our problems, the self-centered mind within ourselves, then we'll be willing to take that in and then give out our happiness in the form of white light, which then, by giving it out, it actually increases our happiness. We don't lose out, we increase our happiness and well-being. So that has to be understood at its very core. Then, although it may still be uncomfortable, we at least know the significance and know that it is something that it can be possible to practice at some point. I don't know if that helped. Who was asking the question? Does it help a bit to clarify?
That was a question for Anne. So she's still in the room with us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. So I know this could lead, like it's opening the, what is it called? The Pandora's box or the can of worms, I'm sure.
Yeah.
This is going to lead to many more, I'm sure, discussions with yourself or with your partners, or reading more. But at least it's some sort of basis for us to, we have a long journey. We all can proceed on our journey in our own way. And, if this has helped you at least, give you some food for thought, then it's maybe, hopefully some good food for thought eventually. So I know you, want to have plans for the rest of your Sunday morning, those back there in the States. So just before we go over too much time, we'll just take a few moments to settle down and just take a few moments to quieten mind again. Coming back to a central point within ourselves. So before we end the session for our gathering now, let us take this opportunity to dedicate our positive deeds, what we call merits, because we started on a good note with a positive motivation, and the time we spent together was all done in the most meaningful way, discussing these words of wisdom from great ancient masters, the Buddha's teachings. So now we dedicate, because our time has been meaningful, and we've created what is called merit or positive karma. Let us dedicate that for the welfare of all sentient beings. That may our merits become a cause and as a way to alleviate the sufferings of all beings and bring them the ultimate happiness. May these merits become a cause for my enlightenment. And when we seek enlightenment, primarily to be able to alleviate the suffering of other beings and bring them ultimate happiness, then whatever we do will actually become a cause for enlightenment. So with that profound dedication in our mind, we can imagine that dedication as a sort of like an inspiration, like a beacon of light within our hearts that will be there at all times. And in fact, what is said to be our essential, the most essential being nature of our mind is said to be that pure nature, that what is called the Buddha nature within ourselves, that possibility, that potential of actually becoming enlightened. So this dedication can be like an activation of that, the most profound and the greatest potential we have within ourselves, that it will never be lost, that is with us at all times. And this meditation practice and discussions and all of that is just a further way of further activating this potential we have within ourselves. And say that we have to mature that potential, and which will then gradually become an enlightened mind. So therefore, we can try to reassure ourselves that no matter what happens in our life, that potential within ourselves will never be destroyed. And so that is what our most cherished possession we can say that we have. And so with that sort of sense of assurance, we can now slowly come out of our meditation here by gradually being aware of our physical presence. And slowly, as we begin to open our eyes wider, we come out of our, accept the external reality now. And so this is my last session with you all for the time being. So I thank you all for eagerly participating, paying such great attention, bringing up such nice questions and comments. Thank you so, so much.